The Keoladeo National Park, formerly the Bharatpur Bird Sanctuary, in Rajasthan was created 250 years ago, in 1760, and is named after a temple within its boundaries. By 1985, it had become a UNESCO World Heritage Site. But our story begins in early 1934, when the park was a hunting ground for the Maharajas of Bharatpur. The 17-year-old Maharaj Kumar of Bharatpur, Sir Y. Rajendra Singh Bahadur, was entertaining Robert Gove, his guest from faraway Australia. Rajendra Singh's father was reputed to have kept as many as 24 Rolls-Royces in his royal garages, including 5 smaller 20-horsepower models and one specially equipped for tiger shooting. He sent his son to Bryanston School in England, and then to Wellington in New Zealand. Australian automotive historian Graham Cox says the Maharaja was a close friend of Julius Gove, Robert's father, who sold horses to the Indian government and aristocracy. They were fine Australian horses of all kinds. Polo mounts, race horses, and thousands of horses for the Indian Army, explains Cox. The horses were renowned in India. It was not unusual to sell a single racehorse for £3,000, a princely sum in those days. When the two men, the 17-year-old Indian aristocrat and his friend Robert Gove, returned to the palace, an unusual deal was done. The details are sketchy, but Cox believes Gove took possession of a 1931 Horch 480 as a gift or in part payment for a prize horse. While it's a fanciful theory, we do know the deal was done in late 1933 or early 1934, and that the young Maharaj Kumar would have barely missed the car in the enormous garage. And given that the Maharaj Kumar, years later, in lieu of payment for a stay at New Delhi's expensive luxury hotel Claridge's, left behind a Rolls-Royce to set against his bill, a Horch for a horse, or horses, doesn't sound improbable. What was surprising was that there was a Horch in the royal fleet. Horch was hardly the staple diet of the Indian Maharajas. In today's terms, a Horch 480 was the equivalent of an Audi R8. Magnificent and extremely quick, but far more exclusive. The Maharaj Kumar's Horch was the 25th car built out of a total production run of scarcely more than 50. Built from 1931 to 32 at the height of the Depression, the 480 boasted a 5-litre straight-8 that produced 100 horsepower, propelling the car to a max speed of 135 km per hour. Fuel consumption was a wallet emptying 21 litres per 100 km. Robert Gove was no doubt excited to bring back to Australia such a rare and valuable automobile. The dark brown Horch arrived in Melbourne and was registered in May 1934. According to Cox, the car created a sensation. Australia had suffered through the Depression years of the 1930s and luxury cars were few and far between. Robert Gove created quite a stir wherever he drove the car, his Indian manservant Mabu always at his side. In 1945, Robert Gove was involved in an accident outside the Frankston Theatre in Melbourne and the Horch was damaged. It was hard to get cars repaired at the time, so Robert bought an Austin 7 for transport. When the war was over, he had the Horch repaired and continued to drive it until August 1946 when it was sold, says Cox. The car passed through several owners and was later repainted to its present grey and duck-egg blue tones in the mid-1950s. In the 1980s, the Horch was acquired by collector Peter Briggs for his York Motor Museum in Western Australia. There it stayed until sold to collector Dr. Gerhard Heinz in 2009, who lives in New Zealand. The Horch now resides in New Zealand, and has undergone an extensive restoration by Dr. Heinz.